My name is Marcus Vale, and I want to make one thing absolutely clear before I tell you this story. I am not a hero. I am not a genius diplomat with a chiseled jaw and a perfect plan. I am a 34-year-old sergeant from a small city in New Cascadia who drinks too much coffee, talks too much in general, and once cried at a documentary about sea turtles. That is the man who somehow ended up changing the course of interstellar history. I want you to keep that in mind. 18 months ago, I was assigned to the Vethkara Dominion's flagship as a cultural liaison. The official title sounded impressive. The actual job was somewhere between babysitter and party guest, who no one quite knew how to talk to. The Accord of Seven Suns had just been signed between humanity and the Dominion, ending 6 years of cold tension that had nearly turned very hot on 3 separate occasions. Someone at Earth Command decided that putting a human on their flagship would show goodwill. They picked me because I scored highest on the Xenosocial Aptitude exam, and because, apparently, I have what my evaluator called a disarming quality. I think she meant that I don't know when to stop talking. The Vethkara were extraordinary beings, tall, luminous, built like something between a great cat and a dragonfly, with 6 limbs and compound eyes that caught light like shattered crystal. They carried themselves with the quiet certainty of a civilization that had been watching stars while humanity was still learning to farm. They were not cruel, but they were cold, formal. They communicated in precise, layered language, where every word carried 3 meanings, and a wrong answer could end a career or a life. They found humans curious in the way someone might find an unusual rock, interesting to look at, but not something you take seriously. Queen Sithara Vel ruled the Dominion from that flagship. She was the 43rd in her line, and she had earned the throne not by birth alone, but by surviving the trial of resonance, a test I did not fully understand, but which her people described with reverence. She was ancient by any meaningful measure, brilliant, and entirely alone in the particular way that only the most powerful people ever are. Everyone around her was a subject first. She had never, as far as I could tell, had a single conversation in her entire reign where someone spoke to her without an agenda. I did not mean to be different. It was not strategy. The first time I made her laugh, I was not trying to. I had mispronounced a Vethkara greeting so badly that I accidentally told a senior admiral that his ears smelled like wet soil. Her laugh was not the sharp, performative sound of someone being polite. It was brief and genuine and surprised, like it had escaped before she could stop it. She looked almost annoyed at herself afterward. I apologized. She waved it off, and then, quietly, she asked me what I had meant to say. That was how it started. Small moments. Corrections that became conversations. Conversations that became longer than they needed to be. I learned to read her bioluminescent markings, the gold of calm authority, the pale blue of curiosity, the deep violet that she almost never showed anyone. I learned that she preferred silence at the start of her day and could not abide inefficiency. I learned that she had strong opinions about music, which she called organized mathematics, and that the first time I played her a recording of John Coltrane, she listened without moving for 11 full minutes and then said, very quietly, that she needed to think. I did not think I was doing anything remarkable. I was just being myself, which is possibly the least remarkable thing a person can do. Then the pulsar shockwave hit. It came without warning, a massive surge of electromagnetic force that struck the flagship broadside and killed half our systems in 6 seconds. Lights died. Navigation went dark. The backup generators struggled and failed and struggled again. In the chaos, the Queen's attendants were separated from her, doors locked by emergency protocols, and I found myself standing beside her in the dim red glow of a single emergency panel, completely alone, with the ship groaning around us like a living thing in pain. She was still, too still. The kind of stillness that is actually the opposite of calm. I sat down on the floor, right there on the floor of the royal corridor, back against the wall. She looked at me like I had lost my mind. I probably had. I told her to sit down too, because standing in a crisis never actually helped anything, and the floor was more comfortable than it looked. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she folded all 6 limbs carefully beneath her and sat. We stayed there for 3 hours while the crew worked to restore power. I talked, not about the ship, not about the crisis, not about anything useful. I talked about growing up near the coast, about the way certain mornings smelled like salt and cold air, about my grandmother who kept a garden and believed that plants could hear you if you spoke to them kindly. I told her about the first time I saw snow, really saw it, not just on a screen, and how strange it was that something so cold could make the world look so gentle. I rambled. She listened. Occasionally she asked a question, short and precise, and I answered honestly, because at that point, there was nothing else to do. At some point, her markings, which had been pale and tight with controlled fear, slowly softened to gold. I did not know then what that meant. I know now. 8 months after that night, I was summoned alone to her inner sanctum chamber. That had never happened to any non-Vethkara in the entire recorded history of the Dominion. I walked in expecting to be told I had broken some protocol I hadn't known existed. I was mentally running through the list of things I might have done wrong. It was a long list. She was standing with her back to me, all 6 limbs folded inward. I had learned enough by then to know that posture. It was the posture of someone carrying something heavy. She turned. Her markings were deep violet, not a trace of gold. She said my name first, which she never did. Then she switched to standard, cleanly and deliberately, so there would be no mistake. She told me that her royal physicians had conducted a full biological examination. She told me that the results had no precedent in Dominion history. She told me that by every measure available to Vethkara science, I had somehow made her pregnant. My brain stopped working for a moment. I am not exaggerating. I stood there in complete silence while something inside me tried to reboot. I managed, eventually, to say that it was impossible. She agreed that it should be. The Vethkara do not reproduce the way humans do. Their biology is built around something called resonance bonding, a deep quantum biological process that can only be triggered when 2 beings of compatible neural frequency reach a state of profound emotional synchrony. It is extraordinarily rare, even between 2 Vethkara. Between species, it had never happened, not once, not in 12,000 years. Her chief physician explained it to me the following morning, standing very close to the door, as if considering whether to leave. Human emotional output, he said, was unlike anything the Vethkara had ever encountered. We feel across a broader frequency range than almost any species they had catalogued. We project those feelings outward constantly, naturally, without control, or even awareness. Most species simply could not detect the full range. The Vethkara, with their resonance sensitivity, could. And what I had projected during those 3 hours on that floor had not simply reached her. It had, in biological terms, moved through every defense her system had ever built, and reached something she had kept protected for a very long time. I had not done anything extraordinary. I had simply been, in the most complete sense, myself. He said this with the tone of a man describing a small catastrophe. The Council of 12 met within 48 hours. I was placed in my quarters under what was carefully called protective custody, and what was actually closer to very polite house arrest. Through the walls I could feel the shape of the crisis even if I could not hear the words. A Vethkara queen producing an heir was not a private matter. It was a political event of the highest order. An heir of unclear heritage was something the Dominion had no framework for whatsoever. 3 factions formed almost immediately. The traditionalists believed the situation was an error that needed to be corrected, and that I should be returned to human space without delay, in the quietest way possible. The pragmatists believed the child could be a symbol, a living bridge between 2 civilizations that had spent years on the edge of war, and that destroying that bridge before it was even built was short-sighted. The zealots, who had always made me nervous, pulled out ancient texts, claiming that the old Vethkara prophecies had described exactly this: a being from outside the Dominion, whose emotional signal would break biological law and begin a new chapter for their people. They called me a prophetic figure. I cannot express how much I did not want to be a prophetic figure. Sithara came to me that night, alone, without her guard. She moved quietly through the ship in a way that suggested she had done this before, or at least that she was a being who had never truly needed protection to feel safe. She sat across from me. Her markings were very still. She told me the council was leaning toward the traditionalists. She had the power to overrule them, but the fracture it would cause might damage the Dominion in ways that would take generations to repair. She was not asking me to stay. She was giving me an exit. A ship, a heading, a story that would explain everything away. She had thought of all of it already. That was the kind of mind she had. I was quiet for a long time, long enough that she began to rise, assuming I was deciding how to thank her for the offer. I asked her what she wanted. Not the queen, not the dominion, her facer. She stopped moving. I had seen her face down admirals and silence entire chambers with a single look, but this question landed somewhere different. She stood completely still, and I watched something shift beneath all that controlled brilliance, something that did not have a political answer. She told me, quietly and honestly, and without armor for the first time in what I suspected was a very long time. I am not going to repeat what she said, because it was not mine to share, but I heard it, and I believed every word. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and told her we should go talk to her council. I mentioned that I had dealt with hostile committees before. She pointed out that the Council of 12 had ended civilizations. I told her that the committees I had faced had PowerPoint presentations, which was arguably worse. She looked at me for a long moment, then her markings shifted, just slightly, toward gold. I addressed the council the following morning, without a translator, without a diplomatic script, without a single note. I stood in a chamber designed to make visitors feel small, under 12 sets of crystalline eyes, and I did the only thing I actually knew how to do well. I told the truth. I told them about the night of the shockwave. What I had said and why. What I had seen in her, that everyone around her was too formal, or too careful, or too focused on her title to ever look for. I told them that humanity had spent its entire existence being told it was too much, too emotional, too stubborn, too loud, too short-lived to matter in a universe this large. And I told them that every single time, that too much had turned out to be the very thing that mattered most. I told them that their civilization was extraordinary. 12,000 years of history, of law, of science that made ours look like early sketches. And I told them that in 12,000 years, they had never once produced a single being who had sat on the floor with their queen in the dark and simply talked to her like she was a person. The chamber was silent for a long time. One of the pragmatist counselors asked, carefully, whether I was declaring myself a father. I told them I was declaring myself whatever she needed me to be. The paperwork, I said, could sort itself out. The vote was 7-5. The child would be recognized under something they created that day and called dual heritage status, a category that had never existed in Dominion law. I was given a formal title that translated roughly as resonance-bound consort. I found this extremely funny. Sathara found my laughter puzzling and then, after a moment, found it something else entirely. I sent my report to Earth Command. Admiral Chen's reply arrived 6 hours later. It said, in full, that I had gone off script again and that I should not screw this up. There was also a single line at the bottom that said congratulations, which I chose to believe was sincere. I do not know how to do most of this. I do not know what our child will look like, or what language they will dream in, or what they will be called by a civilization still working out the words. I do not know if I am equipped for any of it. I am a sergeant from a small coastal city who drinks too much coffee and cries at nature documentaries, and once accidentally insulted an admiral's ears. But I know that when Sathara's markings turn gold, just in private, just for me, the universe makes a kind of sense that I cannot explain and do not need to. Humanity has always been told we are too much, too feeling, too stubborn, too loud. We burn too bright and too short, and we care about things with an intensity that other species find frankly exhausting. Nobody ever told us that too much might be exactly enough. That love, real and unguarded, and offered without strategy, might be the most powerful force in 14 star systems. Nobody told us that the heart, beating as openly as ours does, might be the thing that finally builds the bridge that treaties never could. I am learning it now, one day at a time, aboard a ship full of beings who are still deciding what to make of me, and I would not trade a single moment of it.